I had been craving some real solitude, the kind you only find when there's no reception, no distant car noise, and no one else within a few miles. I chose a section of secluded bushland that I'd hiked through before, off the usual tracks, but still reachable with some effort. I parked my truck off a back road and trekked in about a kilometer with all my gear. I wasn't worried. I'd camped alone before. The area was quiet, mostly dry eucalyptus forest with lots of sticks and leaf litter carpeting the ground. One of the things I liked about it was how easy it was to hear things moving through it, whether animal or human. Nothing could sneak up without some crunching or cracking underfoot. I found a flat spot near a bend in a small creek, close enough to water but elevated so I wouldn't get damp. No recent signs of people. No ashes, wrappers, boot prints, or broken branches that looked man-made. It felt untouched, peaceful. I set up my tent by late afternoon, a simple one-man job, just enough to keep me out of the elements. I made a small fire pit, collected some dry wood, and got dinner going before the sun dipped. It was winter and the temperature dropped fast once the sun went down. I bundled up and sat by the fire, warming my hands and slowly working through a simple meal. Nothing fancy, just some canned beans and bread. The night settled in completely silent. No wind, not even insect noise. That kind of silence is nice for a while, but it can feel strange too, like the whole forest is holding its breath. I stayed up for a bit watching the fire burn down, sipping some water, and eventually crawled into my tent and zipped myself in. My gear was packed just right inside the entrance. Bear spray clipped to a strap, headlamp close, boots positioned so I could throw them on fast if needed. I dozed off sometime around 10 p.m. and woke up maybe a couple hours later. At first, I didn't know why. It was still dead quiet. Then I heard it again. Plop. Not a crack, not a shuffle. Just a single wet plop, like something heavy and soft falling onto the forest floor. Then nothing. I stayed still, straining my ears. No footsteps, no leaves moving, no breathing. Just that one sound and then complete silence again. It was enough to keep me awake. I stayed in my sleeping bag, listening hard, heartbeat starting to pick up. I'd heard plenty of wildlife noises in the bush, but this wasn't familiar. Eventually, after maybe an hour, I started to drift off again, convincing myself it had been a branch falling or something harmless. I woke just after first light. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the sky had that gray-blue tint. The temperature was still near freezing. I unzipped the tent flap, expecting to see the usual cold morning bush. Instead, I froze. Just to the right of the tent entrance, not more than 2 feet from where my head had been inside the tent, was the head of a kangaroo. Fresh, cleanly severed, still looking like it had only just been dropped. There were no drag marks, no blood trail, and no body anywhere. I shot upright, heart pounding. My eyes scanned the area immediately. There were no fresh boot prints in the leaf litter, no signs of a struggle, just that one clean, horrifying image of a roo's head on the ground like someone had placed it there deliberately. The eyes were still open, the fur damp with dew or blood. I couldn't tell. I couldn't even move for a few seconds. My mind was racing with questions I couldn't answer. What kind of animal could have done that and not made more noise? A big cat, maybe? But they don't decapitate prey like that and leave it in such a way. A human? That thought twisted something in my gut. Why? Why here? Why so quiet? And why leave it like that? And how the hell could they have gotten close enough to do it without waking me? I did a fast check around the immediate area, probably made more noise in 10 minutes than I had in the entire day before. Nothing. Not a single sign of tracks or movement. Everything looked untouched. I didn't wait around. I dumped my water on the coals of the fire, packed my gear in under 10 minutes, and had my pack on my back before the sun broke the horizon. I left the head where it was. I wasn't touching that thing. I walked fast, checking over my shoulder more than I care to admit, back the same way I'd come in. That kilometer felt like 10. Every snapped twig behind me made my heart jump. Every patch of shade felt like something was hiding. When I finally saw my truck through the trees, I didn't slow down until I was inside it, doors locked. I didn't report it. What would I say? There was no crime, technically. No evidence. Just a horrible image burned into my memory and a bad gut feeling I couldn't shake. I've camped plenty of times since, but never in that area again. Never alone in bushland without cell service. And I never sleep with the tent flap closed fully anymore. I want to see what's outside no matter how cold it gets. That image, just waking up, seeing that head inches from where I slept, still sticks with me. I don't think I'll ever get rid of it. To this day, I don't know if someone followed me in there or if they were already out there. I just know I was loud that evening, visible with my fire and flashlight, maybe a little too comfortable for my own good. Maybe someone saw me, maybe they decided to scare me, or maybe worse. I don't know if it was a warning, a message, or something else entirely, but I do know I got lucky, real lucky, because whatever it was, it got that close without me hearing a thing. It got in and out, left its message, and vanished like smoke. That kind of quiet doesn't feel natural. I'll never camp that deep and alone again. Not like that. Not after that morning. I was about 3 hours into a hike that day when I realized I had misjudged the time. The sun was already low, and I was far off from where I had originally planned to be by then. I had started late in the afternoon, thinking I would be able to explore a good stretch of the trail, set up camp before dark, and just relax with a fire and a couple of beers. But I got a little too curious about a fork in the trail and ended up following it way further than I should have. By the time I started backtracking, the light was draining fast. Shadows stretched across the ground. The tree trunks looked darker, thicker, and the air got cooler. I picked up my pace, but the terrain was rough and rocky in places. I wasn't going to make it back to the area I originally planned on camping. That much was clear. It was about then that I ran into a guy on the trail. I didn't expect to see anyone else out there that late, but he seemed friendly. Looked like a local, maybe in his late 40s or 50s, weathered skin, beat-up boots, and a slow, calm way of talking. He asked where I was headed, and I told him I was just looking for a decent spot to set up before it got dark. He nodded and said there was a place not far from the road, hidden enough for some peace and right by the river. He even offered to walk me there. I followed him through a narrow game trail, overgrown but still passable. It wasn't long before we reached a small clearing, almost invisible from the main trail or road. There was a small flat area just big enough for a fire and a truck, nestled between trees and a big boulder. The river was maybe 30 yards away, and I could hear the gentle sound of flowing water. The guy told me it was a favorite hidden spot for hunters and locals who wanted quiet. Then he just turned and left without much else. I got a small fire going quickly with the wood I collected from nearby, and then cracked open a beer. I was tired, sweaty, and a bit annoyed at myself for getting turned around earlier. But now that I was settled, it wasn't so bad. I pulled out my phone just to check it, no signal, of course. I had expected that. So I set up my little Bluetooth speaker and started listening to a comedy podcast I had downloaded. Just familiar voices talking nonsense, but it felt good to have some noise out there in the dark. Since it was already pretty late and I was exhausted, I didn't feel like setting up the tent. I'd brought my truck and had the bed covered with a topper. It was well insulated, and I'd set up a basic sleeping platform in the back with a sleeping bag and space for my gear underneath. I figured it'd be warmer and easier to just crash in there for the night. I left the fire burning low and crawled in, the comedy podcast still playing softly. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up briefly. It was pitch black, no moonlight even filtering through the trees. I could hear the river faintly. I didn't check the time, but I felt fine. Nothing felt off then. I shifted around, pulled my sleeping bag tighter, and went back to sleep. The next morning was cold and crisp. I climbed out of the back of my truck, stretched, and got the fire going again. There was a soft mist on the river, the kind that floats just above the surface in the early hours. I cracked a beer and started pulling out stuff for breakfast. Some eggs, bread, sausage. It was peaceful. I could hear birds starting to stir, twigs snapping as squirrels and other small animals moved around. Then I noticed something. There was a man standing near the edge of the trees, maybe 30 feet away from my camp. I hadn't heard him approach. He wasn't looking at me, just sort of scanning the area, but his head never turned in my direction. He looked off. His clothes were dirty, patched together from layers of jackets, hoodies, and shirts. Tied all over him were plastic grocery bags, dozens of them. Some empty and fluttering slightly in the breeze. Others looked like they had random things in them. His beard was long and unkempt, gray in places. I stood up slowly. I didn't feel panic yet, just a kind of confusion. I figured maybe he was a local drifter, someone who lived rough in the woods. It's not completely unusual in remote areas like this. I said something about the weather, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond. He didn't even flinch, just kept slowly walking the edge of my camp, never really crossing in, never getting too close. I offered him breakfast. Again, nothing. No glance, no words. He just wandered, like he was looking for something. It was like I didn't exist. It was at that point I started feeling real unease. This wasn't a guy passing through. This wasn't someone needing help or food. He was studying the area, not me directly, but the area, like he was trying to figure something out. My eyes dropped to my gear. I had bear spray in the back of the truck, a big canister. I also had a buck knife clipped to my belt, though I doubted it would do much in a real fight. He circled to the back of the boulder, still moving slow, like he had nowhere to be. I offered him a beer, just to keep things from feeling too tense. Again, he didn't react. It was like talking into a void. Then he stopped. He had his back to me and just stood there, completely still. That's when the real fear hit me. My stomach tightened, hands started sweating. The whole situation felt wrong. This wasn't normal behavior, not even for someone mentally unstable or living off-grid. It felt like I was being sized up, or worse, ignored because I had already been dealt with in his mind. I backed slowly toward the truck. My gear was still all over the place. I didn't want to leave anything behind, but I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. I kept my eyes on him, grabbed the bear spray, and just watched him for a moment longer. I took a few steps toward him and held the bear spray in front of me. He didn't move. He didn't even look back. Then slowly, without any reaction to me, he walked into the woods. He didn't run, didn't even pick up his pace, just disappeared into the trees, the sound of plastic bags rustling fading away. I grabbed everything I could and tossed it into the truck bed without organizing. Cooler, stove, food, chair, trash. I didn't care. I just needed to be gone. Within 5 minutes, I was in the driver's seat, engine running, tires crunching over the gravel as I backed out and found the main road. I drove until I hit cell service, about 30 minutes out, pulled into a gas station and just sat in the lot for a while. I didn't go to the police. What would I even say? A man stood near me, didn't talk, and walked away? Nothing technically happened. No crime, no proof, just a feeling of something being deeply wrong. But I still think about it. The way he acted, the way he never once looked directly at me, the way he knew I was there and didn't care. I think about the location too, how hidden it was, how he could have been watching me all night without me knowing. How lucky I was to sleep in the truck with the doors locked instead of inside a thin tent. I haven't gone camping solo since that trip. Not because I'm scared of the outdoors, but because I can't shake the idea that if I had just done one thing differently, set up the tent, gotten up in the night to pee, even left my truck door cracked, I might not have made it to morning. That spot felt like it was meant to trap someone, not help them hide away. And I was just smart or lazy enough to avoid it. I don't think I'll ever camp near that valley again. I had planned the trip for weeks. I wanted to go off the grid for a while. No phone, no internet, no one around. Just the woods, the stars, and the sound of the wind through the trees. I picked a quiet patch of forest up north, several hours from the nearest town. It wasn't a marked campsite, just a spot I'd found through some satellite images and topographic maps. It looked peaceful. I packed everything I'd need: food, a tent, extra layers, bear spray, knife, first aid, solar charger. I double-checked everything twice. I wanted to be prepared. The drive out was long but calming. The last hour or so was down a narrow, rocky forest road that looked like it hadn't seen a vehicle in years. Branches scraped the sides of my truck, and I had to ease over a few shallow streams and muddy patches. By the time I got to the spot, The sun was dipping low. I hiked in a short way and found a flat, quiet area near a small stream. The air was crisp, clean. I set up camp, got a fire going, and ate a simple meal before crawling into my tent. The first night was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that feels thick. No planes overhead, no far-off hum of highways, just the occasional rustle of leaves or crack of a branch somewhere deep in the woods. But nothing alarming. I slept better than I had in weeks. The next couple days went by without anything unusual. I spent time gathering firewood, hiking small trails, and just sitting by the stream. The quiet started to feel good. I adjusted to the rhythm of the woods. I kept my food hung up and followed all the typical camping precautions. I saw a few deer, a fox, lots of birds. Nothing big, no people. On the fourth night, things shifted. It started with the sound of movement just outside my tent. I had gone to bed early, around 9 p.m., after a long day of walking. It was cold out, the kind of cold that settles into your bones if you're not layered up. I was half asleep when I heard the noise, something brushing softly against the side of my tent. At first, I thought it was wind. Then I realized the air was still, dead still, no breeze. The noise was slow, deliberate. A soft rustle followed by a faint thud, then silence. I lay completely still, listening. My heart picked up. I reached slowly for the knife I kept next to my sleeping bag. I didn't move beyond that. I waited. Whatever it was, it didn't try to get in. After about 10 minutes, the sounds faded away. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I checked around the tent. I saw faint depressions in the soft earth, but nothing clear enough to say what made them. Could have been an animal, maybe even a curious deer. I didn't see any claw marks or torn fabric. Still, I kept my knife close the next night. The fifth day, it felt like something was watching me. It's hard to explain. I'd look up from boiling water or tying my boots and just feel it. Eyes on me. The hairs on my neck would stand up, even though I saw and heard nothing. The forest was still, too still. The birds weren't singing as much. The little animals I'd seen scurrying about before were gone. That night, I barely slept. The same brushing sound came back, but it was heavier this time. It didn't stay long. Just a few soft footsteps, then silence. I kept the fire going longer that night and laid awake with my hand on the knife for hours. The sixth morning, I decided I would leave. Something wasn't right. I started packing things up, but I felt watched the entire time. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every little sound made me pause. Then I found the scratch. It was on a tree near my camp, one I passed every day to get water from the stream. 3 long gouges in the bark, fresh, too high up for any small animal, too clean and deep to be weather damage. I hadn't seen it the day before. I didn't know what made it, but I knew it wasn't something I wanted to stay around to find out. I finished packing quickly and started hiking back to the truck. I kept my knife in hand the entire time. The woods were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. Felt tense, like the forest was holding its breath. Halfway to the truck, I heard something behind me, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping under weight. I stopped and listened. Another crack, closer. I turned but saw nothing. I started moving faster, heart pounding. I wasn't running, but I was close. I heard it again, this time off to the side. Then silence. I didn't stop again until I reached the truck. When I finally got in and started the engine, I let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. I drove back down that terrible road, scraping branches and bouncing over rocks, not caring. I just wanted out. I didn't relax until I hit pavement again. I drove until I reached a small gas station, went inside, and just stood there for a while, surrounded by people, lights, noise. Felt surreal. I never figured out what it was. Maybe a mountain lion, maybe something else. Something big, quiet, and curious. I'll never know. I haven't gone back to that area since. I still camp, but now I stick to places with more people around. More noise. I double-check my surroundings constantly. That feeling, that thick silence, the sense of being watched. It stays with you. It gets under your skin. That trip reminded me how small I am out there. How fast the forest can turn from peaceful to predatory. Whatever was out there didn't want me gone bad enough to attack, but it didn't want me staying either. And I listened. I had been planning the camping trip for weeks. Life had been wearing me thin, work stress, family obligations, the constant buzz of everyday noise that never let me think clearly. I needed to get away just for a while. The mountains a few hours north felt like the right place. A remote campsite tucked into a stretch of forest with no reception and no people. That's exactly what I wanted. Complete quiet. I packed simple. A decent tent, some food, my camping stove, sleeping bag rated for cold nights, and enough water to get me through a few days. I wasn't planning on hiking far from the site, just sitting in the peace and letting time pass. That first night was peaceful. I had reached the site by late afternoon, set up the tent under the cover of tall pines, and gathered some dry branches for a small fire. The wind moved softly through the trees, and as the sun went down, the stars showed up like someone had shaken glitter across the sky. I sat by the fire until the cold crept in, then zipped myself into the sleeping bag inside the tent. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up needing to pee. The kind of half-awake moment where you're debating whether it's worth getting up or if you can hold it. Eventually, I gave in. It was colder than I expected. My breath came out in little white clouds as I stepped out of the tent. I did my business a short walk from the tent and crawled back in, still shivering a little. That's when I first noticed the sound. It was subtle, but I could hear something brushing lightly against the side of the tent. I figured it was the wind at first, maybe a branch. But the sound wasn't steady like wind. It was soft and slow, like something dragging along the fabric, pausing, then moving again. I stayed still and waited, my ears tuned to the sound. After a while, it stopped, and I chalked it up to a tree limb I hadn't noticed earlier. I went back to sleep eventually. The next morning, there were no tracks around the tent, just the ones I had made. I checked out the area anyway and didn't find anything unusual. The day went by without much to report. I made a simple breakfast, sat by the small fire with a book, then went for a short walk. The place was quiet, and the woods felt calm. By sunset, I was already thinking about how nice it would be to stay another night. But the second night didn't go like the first. I woke again around the same time. Something felt off. I couldn't hear the wind or the usual rustle of leaves. It was dead quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. And then I heard a faint crunch outside the tent. It wasn't close, but it was distinct. Footsteps, slow, heavy. I stayed frozen, kept moving, circling around. I didn't dare move. I didn't even want to breathe loudly. Then came another noise, quieter, but somehow worse. A soft exhale, like someone letting out a breath. Not close, but definitely human. I stared up at the ceiling of the tent, eyes wide open, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't seen a single person in the area. No cars at the parking lot. No other campers. Who would be walking around out here in the middle of the night? The footsteps faded after a while. I stayed awake for what felt like hours, listening. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again. When I got up in the morning, I searched the ground. This time, there were prints. Not boot prints, barefoot. The heel and toes were clear in the dirt. They circled the tent and led off into the trees. I stared at them for a long time. They were big, and whoever made them wasn't walking casually. The steps were deliberate. I wanted to pack up and leave right then, but I convinced myself it was probably just someone hiking, maybe someone living off-grid. Maybe they saw my fire and got curious. I didn't want to overreact. Still, I kept my hatchet closer that day. I didn't go far, just stayed near the site, but I kept looking over my shoulder. Every little sound in the woods felt like a signal. That night, I didn't light a fire. I thought maybe it had drawn someone in. I kept everything quiet. Ate a cold dinner, packed my things up more tightly, and sat inside the tent for a long time, just listening. The forest made its usual sounds. Branches swaying, small animals moving through undergrowth, but nothing that sounded like a person. At some point after midnight, I felt the air shift. Cold air spilled in through the floor of the tent like something had disturbed the area just outside. I held my breath. Then I heard a sniff, long and deep. It was so close that I could feel the vibration through the ground. Something was standing just outside the tent. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I could hear it breathing, heavy, nasal breaths. Then there was a faint push against the side of the tent. Not like someone bumping into it. It was more like something pressing its weight, leaning into the fabric. I felt it along my back. It was warm. I had my sleeping bag pulled up to my neck, but I could feel the heat through it. It was big, solid. Whatever it was didn't move fast or nervously. It was calm, confident. I thought it was a bear at first, but the breath didn't sound right. It was too steady, too calculated. I stayed frozen. I don't know how long I lay there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Eventually, the weight lifted. Whatever it was stepped back. I could hear it walking off, the faint sound of leaves and sticks shifting under its feet. Then silence again. I waited until dawn before moving. As soon as light started breaking, I got out of the tent and checked the ground. More prints. Not human this time. Not quite right. They weren't paw prints either. It looked like something in between. Wide pads, but longer than a bear's foot. And deep. The weight must have been massive. I packed everything in record time. I didn't even bother with breakfast. I kept looking into the trees while I worked, half expecting something to step out and watch me. Nothing did. I took the trail back to my truck without stopping. I didn't even think about food or water. I just walked. When I got back to the parking lot, my truck was the only one there, just like when I'd arrived. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat still for a while before starting the engine. Back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched me, that it had been standing there longer than I realized. The warmth against my back was something I kept thinking about, the sheer mass of it, how quiet it had been. I didn't tell anyone the full story. I said I cut the trip short because of bad weather. But for weeks afterward, I kept waking up in the middle of the night, listening for breath outside my window. I still go camping sometimes, but I don't go alone anymore, and I never stay in places that quiet. Something was out there that night. Not a ghost, not a monster from some storybook, just something real, something big, something that didn't mind getting close. And I think the only reason I'm still here is because I didn't move, because I pretended not to notice, because whatever it was didn't feel threatened. That was enough to save me, but just barely. It started like a regular weekend trip. I'd done enough solo camping trips over the past year that I had it down to a routine. I wasn't new to it anymore, but I also didn't consider myself an expert. I was careful, though. I planned my routes, kept people informed about where I'd be, and packed everything I might need. This time, I picked a state forest about 3 hours north. Not super remote, but quiet enough with a few backcountry sites that weren't well trafficked. The plan was simple. Park at the small trailhead lot, hike in about 6 miles to a designated primitive campsite, stay 2 nights, and hike out. I checked the forecast, clear skies, mild temperatures, low wind. I double-checked my pack the night before. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, maps, compass, knife, first aid kit, flashlight, batteries, extra layers. Everything was there. I set my alarm for 5 the next morning and went to sleep. I reached the trailhead just after 9. My car was the only one in the lot. There was no ranger station, just a small signboard with a weathered map behind scratched plexiglass. I locked up, threw my pack on, and started walking. The first few miles were quiet and uneventful. The trail was narrow but clear, weaving through dense hardwoods with patches of pine. The air was cool, and the sun came in through the trees in streaks. Felt peaceful, exactly what I wanted. I passed a dry creek bed, climbed a low ridge, and eventually found the faint side trail that led to the site I'd picked out on the map. It wasn't marked, but I could tell others had used it before. The clearing was small, just enough space for a tent and a fire ring made of blackened stones. A few logs had been dragged over and set up as seats. It was about 50 yards from the edge of a wide, still pond. No cabins, no trash, no signs of recent use. Perfect. I set up my tent, filtered water from the pond, and spent the rest of the day exploring nearby trails with a lighter day pack. I didn't see anyone. By the time the sun started going down, I was back at camp, sitting on one of the logs, eating a hot meal from my camp stove. Birds called in the distance, and insects had started to buzz in the air. I sat for a long time after the meal, watching the trees darken, just listening. When it was too dim to see without a light, I packed up, hung my food bag high in a tree a good distance from the tent, and crawled inside for the night. I woke up once around 2 a.m., needing to pee. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. It was cold, and the woods were still. No wind, no movement. The moon was out, bright enough to see by without a flashlight. As I stood there, I had a strange sense that something was off. Couldn't place it. Just an uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing there. No movement, no sounds. Just the usual stillness of the woods at night. I chalked it up to nerves, went back inside the tent, and lay awake for a while before drifting off again. The next morning, I was up early. I made coffee, ate, and packed a day pack for another long walk. My plan was to loop around the far side of the pond and follow a ridge trail that connected to a second loop. I'd be out for hours. I left the tent and gear as it was. About 3 miles into the loop, I stopped to check the map near a rocky outcrop. As I sat there drinking water, I noticed something that didn't fit. It was a footprint, not mine, on the trail just ahead. It was older, maybe a day or two, but it was a boot print. Someone else had been out here. That wasn't surprising by itself, but I hadn't seen or heard anyone, and I was sure no other cars were at the trailhead when I arrived. I told myself it was probably just an old track. Someone might have come in and out before me. Still, it stuck in my head. I finished the loop and headed back toward camp. It was mid-afternoon when I returned. The tent was just as I'd left it. My gear was untouched. Everything seemed normal. I ate, relaxed, and walked the perimeter of the pond again. It was quiet. Still no sign of anyone. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing small sounds outside the tent. Not constant, not close, just occasional movement, like a twig snapping, leaves crunching. Once, I heard what might have been footsteps. I froze and held my breath, listening, but they didn't come closer. They just stopped. After a long while, I fell asleep from exhaustion. On the third morning, I woke up early again. I was planning to pack up and hike out, but when I stepped out of the tent, I stopped cold. There were new footprints around the clearing, fresh ones. Someone had been walking near my tent during the night. They came from the woods and circled the tent in a wide loop. I could see the impressions clearly in the damp soil. They didn't match mine. That was the moment the whole trip changed. All the peace and quiet I'd felt before was gone. I felt exposed. I packed up fast. Tent, food, gear. It all went into the bag as quickly as I could manage without leaving anything behind. I scanned the woods constantly as I worked. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anyone, but the sense of being watched came back stronger than ever. I started hiking out. I moved fast, faster than I'd planned. My legs were sore, but adrenaline kept me going. Every so often, I stopped and listened. I thought I heard movement behind me once, but when I looked, the trail was empty. 2 miles from the trailhead, I saw another boot print, fresh, heading the same direction I was, but not mine. It was off to the side of the trail, like someone had been standing there watching the path. When I reached the trailhead, my car was still the only one in the lot. That didn't make sense. Either someone had come in from another access point, or they hadn't come in with a car at all. I got in, locked the doors, and drove without stopping for an hour. I didn't relax until I hit a stretch of highway surrounded by towns and gas stations. Even then, the feeling stayed with me. I never went back to that forest. I still camp, but I'm more careful now. I stick to areas with more traffic. I don't camp solo in remote places anymore, and I don't ignore strange noises outside the tent. Because whoever was out there that night, whoever walked around my tent, they didn't come to say hello, and I never heard them leave. I didn't grow up camping. That kind of thing just wasn't part of my life until I was in my mid-30s. I lived in a small city most of my life, worked in IT, and rarely even left the state. But I got into hiking a few years back, just short day hikes on local trails at first. It was a way to disconnect from work and screens. I liked the peace of it, the quiet, the way your mind slowed down out there. That eventually turned into overnight hikes, then weekend trips, then solo camping. This story happened during one of those solo trips. It wasn't my first, but it was definitely early on in my camping experience. I wasn't an expert, but I knew enough. I could pitch a tent, follow a map, purify water, and handle myself. I had the right gear, I followed all the leave no trace stuff, and I wasn't reckless. At least I didn't think I was. What happened on that trip didn't come down to gear or skill, though. Came down to something a little harder to plan for. The trail I chose was one of those lesser-known routes through a national forest about 4 hours from where I lived. It wasn't completely off-grid, but it was isolated enough that I wouldn't expect to see more than 1 or 2 other people over the course of a weekend. That was the appeal. I wanted quiet, space, something away from the usual trails and campsites where groups of kids played music or where you could hear traffic in the distance. This was deep forest, real camping, just you and whatever came with the woods. I planned to hike in on a Friday morning, set up camp a few miles in, then spend Saturday exploring the area with just a day pack before hiking back out Sunday. Pretty standard stuff. I had a printed topo map, compass, GPS, plenty of food and water. Everything I'd need for 2 nights. I wasn't in a rush. I had the whole weekend, and I planned to stretch it out. The weather was perfect when I started out. Cool and clear, the kind of bright blue sky you only get in spring or early fall. The trailhead was empty when I parked. I signed in on the trail log, tightened my pack, and started walking. The trail wound through thick forest for a few miles before narrowing into more rugged terrain. It wasn't hard hiking, just a little overgrown in places. I crossed a few streams, climbed some gentle ridges, and eventually found a small clearing near a cluster of old pines. It was maybe 100 feet off the trail. Flat ground, dry, and just enough space for my tent. Perfect. I set up camp, stowed my food properly in a bear bag, and got it up in a tree well away from my tent. Then spent the afternoon walking the area without the weight of my full pack. I didn't see anyone else the whole day. Not even footprints. No rappers on the trail. Nothing. Just birds, trees, and the sound of wind. That's what I was out there for. Night came on fast. The canopy in that part of the forest was thick, so once the sun dipped low, it got dark quickly. I ate early, then sat near the edge of the clearing for a while, just listening. You don't realize how much noise a forest makes until you sit still in the middle of it. Creaks and pops. Things move. Branches shift. Sometimes it's wind. Sometimes it's animals. The longer you sit, the more your ears pick up. Eventually, I crawled into my tent. No fire, just my headlamp and the dim light from my watch. I read a bit, then zipped into my sleeping bag and turned off the light. The first night passed quietly. I woke a few times, mostly just because it was colder than I expected, but nothing unusual. I listened, waited, then drifted back off. The forest makes you tired in a different way than work or city life. Pulls it out of you. By morning, I was stiff but rested. I boiled some water, had a hot breakfast, then packed a day bag and took off to explore farther up the ridge. I brought my GPS, some snacks, extra layers, and a bit of emergency gear. I didn't have a destination, just a loop I planned to walk over a few hours. The higher I climbed, the better the views got. Around midday, I reached a rock outcrop with a perfect overlook. A full stretch of forest in every direction. No towns, no roads, nothing but green. I sat there for a long time, ate, and felt good about how far I'd come in just a few years. This kind of trip used to feel impossible. Now I could do it without thinking twice. I made it back to camp just before the sun started to dip again. No signs of anything disturbed. No tracks. My food bag was untouched. The tent was just as I left it. Still, something felt different that night. Not wrong, just still. The air was calmer than the night before. No breeze, no rustling branches, and the usual chorus of night insects was quieter. Not silent, just toned down, like someone had turned the volume knob down a few notches. I went through my routine, ate dinner, cleaned up, double-checked everything. Then I settled into the tent again and read until I started nodding off. The noise that woke me up came sometime after midnight. It wasn't loud, just out of place. A dry, quick snap of a stick, maybe 20 feet from the tent. That by itself wasn't strange. Animals move at night. Deer, raccoons, whatever. But what followed made me stop breathing. Another snap, then nothing, then another slightly closer. I didn't move. My head was half out of the sleeping bag. I held my breath and listened. The sound didn't come again. I waited maybe 5 minutes, ears straining, trying to separate the sounds of the forest from whatever might be real. Then something touched the tent. Not hard, just a light brush, like something ran a finger across the side near my feet. A small movement, a test. I froze. I didn't call out. I didn't move. I just listened. More silence. Then the sound of slow, deliberate steps. Human steps. You can tell the difference. An animal might crunch through the brush, but people step carefully. They try not to make noise. And that's what I was hearing. Someone trying not to be heard. The steps circled halfway around the tent, then stopped. I didn't breathe. Couldn't. My hand was on the small knife I kept in my pack next to me. It wasn't a weapon, not really. Just a tool. But it was the only thing I had. I thought maybe it was a hunter who'd gotten lost. Or a ranger. Or another camper. But none of those people would just walk up on a tent in the middle of the night and not say anything. They wouldn't circle in the dark. I waited for hours. The steps never came back. No more sounds. Just the slow return of normal forest noises. I never heard anyone walk away. That was the part that scared me the most. I waited for daylight without sleeping, just staring at the ceiling of the tent. When the sun finally rose, I got out carefully and scanned the area. I didn't see anyone, but there were tracks. Human ones. Boot prints, fresh in the soft dirt near the tent. They came from the trees, looped around the clearing, and stopped near the back of the tent. Then they turned back toward the forest. There weren't many, just a few, but they were there, and they weren't mine. I broke camp fast. I didn't eat. I didn't take any more photos or enjoy the sunrise. I just packed everything, made sure I left no trace and got moving. Kept my knife out. I watched the trees. The hike out took less time than it should have. I didn't stop to rest. Every now and then I looked behind me, scanned the brush for movement. I never saw anyone. No voices, no distant figure, just the trail and the sound of my own boots moving fast. When I got back to the trailhead, my car was still there. No one else had signed in on the log since I had. I checked twice. I opened the car, threw my gear in the back, locked the doors, and didn't stop driving until I hit a town. I never reported it. What would I say? Someone walked near my tent? There was no crime, no confrontation, just the kind of thing you remember long after you've left the woods behind. Since then, I've gone on more trips. I still camp alone sometimes, but I don't go that deep anymore. I stay closer to places with people with access. I bring more gear. I take more precautions. And I always listen before I sleep. Because whatever that was, whoever that was, they didn't make a sound leaving. And that's the part I'll never forget. I'd been working as a safari guide for several years, mostly in southern Africa, with plenty of time spent in the bush. I wasn't new to wildlife or wilderness. I'd walked alongside elephants before, been growled at by leopards in the dark, and I'd tracked rhino on foot in the dry heat of the lowveld. I'd had close calls and strange nights, but this one was different. This one stuck with me like a bruise under the skin, something I couldn't stop thinking about no matter how much time passed. It was winter, the dry season in the lowveld, and that meant cold nights and mornings so chilly they made your bones ache. We were doing a routine guided camping trip deep in a reserve that wasn't too well known to tourists. It was mostly for seasoned trackers and guides, people like me and my buddy, who I'll just refer to here as T. We were both off duty for a few days and decided to head out to one of the old overland routes near the edge of Kruger, just outside the main grid. It was one of those trips we do just for ourselves. No clients, no expectations, just two guys in the bush. We packed light, as we always did, canvas tents, sleeping bags rated for cold, rifles because you don't go out there unarmed, and some food supplies. No electricity, no phone signal, just the raw open land and whatever came with it. We set up camp next to a dry riverbed, which was usually safe, as long as you didn't pitch right in the sand. The bush around us was thin in places, thick in others. Plenty of thorn trees, dry grass, patches of thick scrub, all of it quiet and still under the winter moon. That first night had gone by without any real trouble. We sat by the fire after dinner, watching the flames flick and crackle, listening to hyenas in the distance and the occasional owl. You get used to those sounds. You learn what's harmless and what's worth getting up for. That night, I remember checking the tent one last time for any small critters, making sure the zippers were all closed, everything packed away, and that the fire was low but still giving off some warmth. Then I zipped into my sleeping bag, curled up tight, and went to sleep. The cold was sharp that night, biting, really. I'd slept in cold tents before, but this one got into my bones. I remember waking up in the early hours, just when the night is at its coldest, maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. I didn't open my eyes at first. I just lay there, facing one side of the tent, trying to wiggle my toes and fingers inside the bag to get some warmth going again. That's when I noticed it. Something warm was against my back. At first, I didn't react. I thought it was maybe the sleeping bag bunched up, or maybe I was just dreaming. But as I became more awake, I realized it wasn't part of the bag. It wasn't gear. It was soft, heavy, but not moving. Just there, like a cushion of heat pressed up against the canvas wall, right against the outside of the tent, and my back was against it. I lay still for a moment, completely still, trying to figure out what the hell I was feeling. The warmth was strong, more than what I'd expect from the tent itself. It felt like body heat, actual living heat. I could feel the canvas between us, but it didn't seem like much of a barrier. My heart started to speed up. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe deeply. I was suddenly more awake than I'd been all night. Then I heard T's voice from his tent. It was soft, like he didn't want to be heard by whatever might be nearby. He said my name in a low, trembly voice, just loud enough to carry through the quiet. Was I awake? Without thinking, and in the stupid way your body reacts when your brain's still catching up, I answered out loud. Loud enough for something outside to hear. As soon as the word left my mouth, the warmth on my back shifted. The weight behind the canvas stood up. I felt the movement ripple through the tent wall, something massive rising slowly. I didn't turn, couldn't, but I heard the sound. The slow, heavy exhale of an animal, the brush of fur against the canvas, and then footsteps. Not the light trot of a jackal or a stray hyena. These were deep, padded steps, soft but deliberate. Then nothing. It was gone. I didn't move for a long time. I just lay there, heart thudding, trying not to shake. The cold was gone from my back. Whatever had been there had taken its heat with it. Eventually, I turned slowly and looked out the small mesh window near the back of the tent. But the moonlight didn't show anything obvious. Still, my gut told me what it was. I didn't need to see it to know. That kind of weight, warmth, presence, it wasn't an impala or a warthog. That was a lion. And not just any lion. That had been a big male. I didn't sleep after that. Neither did T, though we didn't talk until the sun came up. We just stayed in our tents, wide-eyed, listening for more movement. But the bush stayed quiet. That's what chilled me the most. No alarm calls from baboons or birds. No startled rustles. Just a silence that stretched until morning. When the light finally broke over the scrub, we got out and checked the area. There were prints in the dirt, big ones, unmistakable. A male lion had walked right up through camp. We followed the tracks, careful and quiet, rifles ready. They led directly up to the side of my tent, where they stopped. That was the spot. Then they turned and moved away into the scrub. We didn't see him again that day, but we packed up and moved camp by late morning. Too close for comfort. Neither of us said much while we worked. There wasn't anything to say. When you're in that deep and something like that happens, words don't help. You just act. The rest of the trip went by without any big events, but it never really left me. That feeling of something alive, powerful, and utterly dominant pressed right against me with nothing more than a thin layer of canvas between us. It stuck. Not fear exactly, though it was that. It was more than that. It was the reminder that you can do everything right. Set camp properly, respect the land, be alert, and it still won't save you from a moment like that. Sometimes you're just the lucky one who didn't move wrong. After I got back to base, I didn't talk about it much. T and I mentioned it once or twice, just to confirm we hadn't imagined it. We both knew what it had been. No need for debate. I checked the local ranger station a few days later, and they'd had reports of a lone male moving through that part of the bush, likely pushed out of a pride or roaming through new territory. It made sense. Those lions can walk for miles in search of new ground, especially older males. He'd probably smelled the heat from the tents and curled up for the night. I don't think he was hunting. If he had been, things would have gone very differently. I think he just wanted warmth the same way we did. It was just survival, same as us. That experience changed how I camped, though. From then on, I never slept with my back to the canvas. I always made sure there was some buffer, my pack, a rolled blanket, something. Anything to give even an inch of space. It didn't matter that it wouldn't stop anything. It just helped me sleep. Years later, I still think about that night. The silence, the breath I didn't hear until he moved, the way my body knew before my brain did. I've led hundreds of trips since then, seen dozens of lions, heard their roars echo through dry riverbeds at night. But nothing has ever come close to that quiet pressure of something alive and huge curled up just behind me in the dark. Some people think you need to see a lion charge or hear it roar to understand the danger. But I know better now. Real danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just lies beside you in the cold, breathing slow, waiting for the sun. I had been planning the solo camping trip for months. I'd been deep in the woods before, but this time I wanted to go further than I ever had. Not for any special reason. I just wanted the solitude, the kind you only get when there's no cell service, no roads within miles, no sound but wind and birds and bugs. I worked in an office back then. 8 hours a day, staring at a screen, fake smiles, forced meetings. I was burned out. That trip was supposed to clear my head. I wanted to be off the grid, fully cut off. Just me, my gear, and the forest. I started my hike at the trailhead just before sunrise. It was in northern Washington, a few miles south of the Canadian border. The woods up there are thick, tall evergreens, wet earth, moss everywhere. It had rained the night before, so the ground was soft and the air smelled like pine and mud. The trail I followed was marked for a while, but I had plans to go off it eventually, deep into a valley I had spotted on a topographic map. There was a stream running through it and an old logging road that hadn't been used in decades. I figured I could set up camp down there for a few nights. The hike was hard. The first few miles weren't bad, just uphill and wet. But once I veered off the trail, things got slower. I had to bushwhack through dense brush, step over fallen trees, and find my footing on slippery rocks. The pack on my back felt heavier with each step. I had brought enough supplies for 5 days: food, water filters, extra clothes, a tent, tarp, and a small hatchet. I had a flare gun, too, and a personal locator beacon just in case. I wasn't reckless. By the time I reached the spot I had marked on the map, it was late afternoon. I was exhausted, soaked in sweat, and my thighs were burning from the uphill climbs. But the place was perfect. A flat clearing surrounded by thick trees, with the stream running nearby, not loud enough to be annoying but close enough to be useful. I dropped my pack, drank half a bottle of water in one go, and started setting up camp. I got my tent up, staked it tight, and laid out my sleeping bag inside. Then I found 2 trees about 10 feet apart and strung up the tarp between them to create a little shelter where I could cook and sit if it rained. I dug a shallow fire pit, ringed it with rocks, and gathered some firewood. I had a little camp stove too, but I liked real fires. There was a satisfaction to starting one from scratch, feeding it, watching it crackle and glow. The first night was quiet. I made rice and dehydrated beans for dinner, sat by the fire until it burned down to embers, then crawled into the tent. The ground was cold but not uncomfortable. I fell asleep to the sound of crickets and the faint trickle of the stream. The next morning I woke early. The forest was covered in a low mist. Everything was still. I boiled water for coffee, sat on a log, and watched the sun try to break through the trees. I felt good. My body ached, but it was the good kind of ache, like after a long workout. I spent the day walking around the area, just exploring, following the stream, climbing a few nearby ridges to get a better view of the valley. I didn't see anyone. No signs of hikers, no footprints, no wrappers or cigarette butts. Just birds and deer tracks. It was exactly what I had wanted. That night, things started to feel strange. I had just finished eating and was cleaning up near the stream when I noticed something across the water, on the opposite bank. At first I thought it was just a fallen log or a weirdly shaped bush, but the more I looked, the more it seemed out of place. It was upright, tall, and looked too straight to be natural. I stared at it for a while, not moving, but I couldn't see any detail. It was getting dark, and the shadows made it hard to tell. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just a tree stump. I was tired, probably just my eyes playing tricks. But later, after I crawled into the tent and zipped myself in, I started hearing noises. Not the normal forest sounds, these were heavier, deliberate, like slow footsteps in the undergrowth, not far from camp. At first, I held my breath, trying to make sense of it. Could have been a deer, maybe an elk, but it didn't sound like hooves. It sounded like something, or someone walking. I sat up and grabbed my headlamp. I didn't turn it on right away. I just listened. The steps stopped, then nothing, just the stream again and the wind. I waited maybe 30 minutes before I finally laid back down. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, everything looked normal. My gear was untouched. Nothing had been moved. I looked for tracks but didn't see anything fresh. The ground was still damp from the earlier rain, so I figured I would have seen a footprint if someone had been nearby. Still, something felt off. I went about my day as usual. Boiled water, ate, explored a little, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. That sense of being watched stuck with me, like a weight on my back. Couldn't shake it. That night, I built a bigger fire. I kept it going longer, letting the flames stay high. I figured if there was any animal nearby, the light and noise would keep it away. I stayed up until midnight, just sitting there, staring into the fire. Then I finally doused it, climbed into the tent, and lay there in the dark, listening. The sounds came again. This time it was clearer, sticks snapping, brush being pushed aside. It was moving around the perimeter of the camp, slow and cautious. I held my breath, heart racing. I reached for the flare gun just in case. I didn't want to use it unless I had to. Flares don't last long, and I only had 2. Then I heard something else, a low metallic sound, like a zipper, very faint. It was coming from the side of my camp where I kept my bag. My food was hung up in a bare bag from a tree about 30 feet away, but the rest of my gear was under the tarp. I waited, trying to decide what to do. I finally flicked on the headlamp and unzipped the tent fast. The light cut through the darkness, swinging wildly as I looked around. Nothing. The tarp was still there. My bag was still under it. I walked over slowly, scanning the area, flashlight bouncing off trees and leaves. Then I saw it. Just beyond the trees, maybe 30 feet away, was a man, standing, watching. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket or coat. His face was shadowed, and he didn't move when I pointed the light at him. He just stood there, like he was waiting for something. I didn't say anything. I just backed away slowly, keeping the light on him. After a few seconds, I turned and walked straight to the tent, grabbed the flare gun, and fired it straight into the air. The flare burst above the trees, lighting up everything in red. I looked back, he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The first light, I packed everything. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee. I just shoved my gear into the pack, broke down the tent, and got moving. I didn't go back the way I came. I went uphill toward a ridgeline I had scouted the day before. I wanted higher ground and a different path out. The hike was brutal. I was running on no sleep, barely any food, and my nerves were shot. I kept thinking I'd hear footsteps behind me or see that figure in the trees again. But the forest stayed quiet. Too quiet. By late afternoon, I found another flat spot and decided to stop. I had to. My legs were shaking. I set up a hasty camp, didn't even pitch the tent. Just threw down a tarp and wrapped myself in it, with the flare gun in my hand. That night, I didn't hear anything. No movement, no sounds but the wind. The next morning, I started hiking again. I knew I wasn't far from an old logging road I had marked. If I could reach it, I could follow it out to the highway. Took hours, but I eventually found it. It was overgrown but still passable. I followed it for the rest of the day, and by nightfall, I reached a gravel turnoff where I finally got a signal. I called a buddy, gave him my location, and he came and picked me up just before dark. I never went back. I don't know who that man was. I don't know if he followed me, or if he had been watching me from the start. Maybe he was a hunter or just some lunatic living off the grid. Maybe he didn't mean harm, but he didn't announce himself, didn't speak, didn't do anything but stand there in the dark, watching, and that somehow was worse than anything else. I threw out most of my gear after that trip. Got rid of the tent, the tarp, even the backpack. I kept the flare gun, just in case. That trip was supposed to help me reset. All it did was show me how far you can go, how deep into the woods you can get, before you stop being alone and start being watched.